Welcome back to the Breathing Room. I'm Alicia, therapist, storyteller, and owner of Rooted and Rising Counseling, and today we're going to talk about anger. Specifically, this idea that I hear a lot from my clients, especially my Christian clients, that anger itself is wrong, that anger on its own is sinful, that they have this goal of never feeling angry, and while that is a well-intended goal, it's a very unrealistic one. And honestly, this idea that you should never be angry or this goal of never being angry again can be really harmful because you end up suppressing all of that anger, and then there's a big blow up and you get the thing that you didn't want in the first place. So today we're going to look at what scripture actually says about anger, how Jesus himself expressed anger, and practical tools on how we can learn to be slow to anger without shaming ourselves for feeling it in the first place. So let's get into it. I want to talk about a passage in John that describes Jesus going into the temple and tearing the place up. You can also find this same event described in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But I chose John because for me, I feel like these verses give us the most detail. So we find this in John chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. And it reads, "It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and the cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then, going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, 'Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace.' Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from Scripture. 'Passion for God's house will consume me.'" So this account matters because they show us something important and often a little bit uncomfortable, that Jesus experienced anger and Jesus expressed that anger. And scripture does not label this expression of anger or this feeling of anger as sinful. Jesus overturned tables. He drove people out with a whip that he made himself. He spoke firmly and directly, and the disciples named it zeal or passion for God's house, not a moral failure. If anger itself were sinful, we would have a theological problem here. If anger itself were sinful, we would read this passage completely differently. We are told to not allow anger to control us, to be slow to anger, but we are not told we can't be angry at all. So this brings us to a crucial distinction. Anger is not a sin, it is a signal. Anger shows us that something matters. It shows us that a boundary has been crossed. It shows us that there is an injustice present or that a value has been violated. Sometimes anger shows up because our ego has been bruised a little bit. But the issue is not whether anger shows up, because it will. The issue is, what do we do next? That's why scripture doesn't tell us to eliminate anger. It tells us to handle it wisely. So in Ephesians 4:26-27, it says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." Notice what it does not say. It does not say, do not be angry. It says, in your anger, do not sin. So anger is assumed. Anger is expected, but anger is not meant to be in control. So the next thing that I want to tell you guys about is this metaphor that I use in therapy a lot of the time. I use ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, a lot in my sessions. And one of the ACT metaphors, one of the more popular ones, is called passengers on the bus. I use this in therapy, especially when working with things like anger, but it can be used for anything that is ailing you. It could be used for anxiety or frustrations if you don't want to label it as anger. It could even be used for sadness. Today, though, we're talking about anger. So in that vein, imagine your life is a bus. You are the driver. Your values determine the direction. Now imagine anger is a passenger on the bus. Anger gets on the bus. Anger starts fussing. Sometimes anger is quiet and just sitting there simmering. Sometimes anger gets on and slams the door. Sometimes it yells. Sometimes it makes a scene. Anger can ride on the bus. That's allowed. What's not helpful is letting anger grab the steering wheel. When anger drives, we say things we regret. We react instead of respond. We move away from our values instead of toward them. Being angry like this causes us to be angry and sin when the Bible calls us to be angry and not sin. Being angry and not sinning looks like anger being on the bus, but not allowing it to drive. In James chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, it reads, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." Being slow to anger does not mean being emotionless. It means being intentional. It means creating space between feeling and response. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32, it says, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." Slowness is a strength and self-control is power. So let's get practical for a moment. There's a phrase we use in therapy called name it to tame it. And all that really means is that when you can put words to what you're feeling, your brain stops panicking and starts processing. When you name an emotion like anger, you're telling your nervous system, "I see what's happening." And once your body feels seen, the intensity starts to lessen and it comes down naturally. Scripture actually points us towards the same idea in Psalm chapter 4, where it tells us to reflect in your heart on your bed and be silent. That's an invitation to notice what's going on inside before reacting on impulse. So naming anger is how you keep it in the passenger seat instead of the driver's seat. If you don't name it, it tends to sneak up to the front and grab the wheel. You don't tame anger by fighting it. You tame it by acknowledging it. When anger shows up, your first step is to name it. You can say something like, "I notice anger is here." "Anger just got on the bus," or "I'm starting to get heated." This separates you from the emotion and immediately reduces its intensity. Your next step is to check the bus seats. Ask yourself, where is anger sitting right now? Is it yelling from the back, hovering near the front, trying to grab the wheel? Awareness gives you choices. Your next step is to ask what anger is protecting. A lot of times we will say that anger is a secondary emotion, meaning that there is almost always something underneath that anger that we are trying to protect. And it's easier to show that anger than it is to show that vulnerability. And until we figure out what that thing underneath the surface is, it's going to be really hard for us to manage our anger. So anger can often guard a boundary, a value, a wound, or an unmet need. Maybe you're sad, but instead of saying that you're sad and that you're hurt, you act out in anger. So ask, what matters to me that feels threatened right now? This turns anger into information instead of destruction. Your fourth step is to slow the body. You cannot be slow to anger with a fast nervous system. So try this. You'll inhale for a count of 4, hold for 2, and exhale for 6. You'll repeat that twice. Inhale, hold, exhale. Inhale, hold, and exhale. So doing that creates physiological space before an emotional response. Our emotions are very tightly bound to how our bodies are feeling. So when you can slow your nervous system down, you can slow your breathing, slow your heart rate, your emotions start to follow those signals that your body is giving your brain. Your next step is to pause without shame. Pausing is not avoidance. You might say, I need a break before we can talk about this. That's wisdom. That's not weakness. A lot of times when I'm really frustrated or my husband and I start to get into an argument, I have to ask for a break because I know myself very well and I need some space to calm down, to process what I'm thinking, or I'll start saying some things that I don't mean or some things that I might regret. Step 6 is to reflect before rest. So we'll go back to Psalm 4. In verse 4, it says, Be angry and do not sin. Reflect in your heart while on your bed and be silent. So before you go to bed, ask, what triggered my anger today? Did it align with my values? And did I let it drive? Reflection will help to build slowness over time. If you've been carrying shame for feeling angry, I want to gently release you from that burden. Anger does not make you unholy, and avoiding it does not make you holy. Wisdom is learning how to feel angry without being controlled on it. Wisdom is learning how to allow anger onto the bus without letting it take the driver's seat. You are allowed to feel, you are invited to be aware, and you are capable of choosing responses that align with who you are called to be. Thank you for making the space for this conversation today. Until next time, take a breath and give yourself room to respond, not react. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This is The Breathing Room.